Buonasera to anybody else in Europe. And hello and welcome to everybody else wherever you are. And it seems the most important and appropriate place to start a discussion of Christmas and celebrations of Christmas in Italy is with this image right here of the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, with an image on it through a video mapping project of Enel, which is the National Electrical Company Foundation, and particularly the Enel X Corps, who are doing virtual mapping and digitalizing. And this is a digital image of the first Christmas, the first living Christmas, initiated by Francis of Assisi in the little hill town of Greccio, which is in Latium, just south of Umbria. It's in northeastern Latium in 1223. And we'll be talking more about it, and we'll see another image of this fresco in just a minute. I would just like to remind you, for those who've been on tours with me, for those who've heard my other lectures, that this extraordinary Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi is adorned with 10,000 square meters of some of the greatest frescoes ever done between the 13th century and the Renaissance period, the 16th century, on two different levels, the upper church, the lower church. And this here is the Basilica Superiore that we're looking at, the upper church. The bell tower is behind it. The basilica is finished in 1253. Amazingly, it was started in just 1228, 2 years after the death of Francis of Assisi. Can you imagine a two-level church done in under 30 years in the 13th century? Now, in this basilica, you can see the doorway right here. This would be the entrance to the upper basilica. As you go in the basilica, if you look to the wall on your right, you are seeing this fresco. Here it is reproduced on the basilica. Here it is on the wall inside the basilica. This is attributed to the School of Giotto, very, very late 13th century. And this is the first nativity scene, the first living nativity scene. Francis of Assisi is picking up the Christ child, tenderly holding him. He's dressed here like a deacon. And this takes place not as the original scene took place in a stall in 1223, but inside a lovely basilica, maybe actually inside the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi. And of course, present may not be the peasants and the farmers and the artisans who would have been present at Francis's first living creche scene, but nobility, because the purpose of the fresco is to adorn this magnificent papal basilica, a church sponsored by the popes, an incredible power force in the Middle Ages, a wealthy power force, and their building must be elegant and beautiful and give an idea of who they are and what power they have. So there we have the first living creche scene of Greccio as depicted by followers of Giotto, if not Giotto himself, very, very end of the 13th century. And you can see to the right of Francis is the priest. He's looking in astonishment at the child that Francis is holding. To Francis's left, probably in an ermine-colored cloak, would have been Giovanni Bellita, who was a nobleman of Greccio, who actually helped Francis create this living manger scene. And he was wearing blue, of course. Let us remember, and you may remember from past lectures I've done on the Basilica, that red and blue are the colors of nobility. So his garment was no doubt blue. Coming in the door, the women are out in the back there. That's a rood screen. The rood screen in the churches celebrated the sanctuary area from the area where the people were. And in the sanctuary area are simply the nobility, and the friars in the other part of the church behind the rood screen are the women. Rood as in R-O-O-D. And that woman, the first one coming in, is probably Giovanni Vellita's wife, Alticama Castelli. Now, the scene takes place in Greccio. And the reason that the scene takes place in Greccio and the first nativity happens in Greccio is the desire of Francis of Assisi, who sent a message to Giovanni Vellita. And this message is projected here on the facade of the Basilica. And I would like to read it to you. Francis sends word to Giovanni Vellita. If now it seems good to thee that we should celebrate this feast together, go before me to Greccio and prepare everything as I tell thee. I desire to represent the birth of that child in Bethlehem in such a way that with our bodily eyes we may see what he suffered for lack of the necessities of a newborn babe, and how he lay in a manger between the ox and the ass. And that phrase is depicted here on the Basilica. Francis was a good friend of Giovanni Vellita. He used to go often to Greccio. Francis retreated to places of prayer many days a year, probably at least 5 times a year. He was away for 40 days at a time. And he was in places like La Verna, where he received the stigmata. He was at the Hermitage above Assisi many times. He was in Monte Lucio of Spello, and he especially loved Greccio. And he started going to the hill country of Greccio in the first time, probably in about 1209. But by 1217, he's there frequently. He preaches to the people of Greccio. And Giovanni Vellita, a nobleman, is very, very touched by the message of Francis. And he begs Francis to come, to live in a monastery, to find a place to live right in the town of Greccio. But Francis says to Giovanni Vellita, he doesn't feel called to stay in a town. And according to legend, he talks to a little child who's 4 years old and is listening to them. And he gives the child a burning ember, perhaps a piece of wood that's burning. And he says to the little boy, fling this, and wherever it lands is where I will choose to stay when I am here in the area of Greccio. And the little boy flings it, and by miracle, he flings it about 6 kilometers away. That burning ember hits a rocky cliff. It happens to be owned by Giovanni Vellita, that area. And Francis said, this is where I will be when I'm in Greccio. And today there is the Sanctuary of Grecho on that rocky cliff. Pino and I were there just recently. We took our children many, many years ago when they were young, around Christmas time, and we hadn't been back for many years and felt it was time to take another foray to Greccio. So this is a photo I took on arrival. We're getting there probably about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. This is the Sanctuary of Grecho now as you enter it. And to the left is a church that was actually a 20th century church dedicated to the Immaculate Conception. Just behind the gentleman that you see there in that piazza is the Grotto, where Francis first set up a nativity, and it was a living nativity, an ox and an ass. And it said, the legend says, that the nobleman, to his astonishment, Giovanni Vellita, seemed to see Francis holding a child very, very tenderly as he preached the Christmas gospel. This is the Grotto. And right here we have an image of the Christ child. And this should have been roughly the place where Francis, he's preaching the Christmas gospel, the priest is preaching it, but Francis is preaching to the people about the birth of a child in Bethlehem. Francis had been to the Holy Land in 1219. He didn't get as far as Bethlehem. He met with the Sultan of Egypt at the time in Damietta along the Nile. And he always remembered his trip, and it said that he desired for many years to remember Bethlehem and to remember it in a special way at Christmas. And he did that year in Greccio in 1223. Behind this rock are 2 frescoes. Above the rock where the Krish scene of Francis was set up, there would have been an ox and an ass to the right, is an altar. Above the altar is an image in fresco, follower of the School of Giotto, 14th century. On the left, we see Francis praying before the Christ child. On the right, the first nativity, the Virgin nursing the child, and Joseph. Let's zoom in on those. Here we see the image of Francis. Here he's dressed as a deacon. He's assisting at the Mass. On the right, you can see the priest. The gospel is open to the Christmas story. There's the Christ child all swaddled. And behind Francis, this would be Giovanni Velita, the nobleman who helped him set up this creche scene exactly as Francis wanted it, and his wife, who also assisted. And then to the right of this was the image of the Virgin nursing the Christ child, and Joseph, hand on his under his beard and his cheek. He seems to be either reflecting or meditating or a bit sleepy. And in the Middle Ages, Joseph is often depicted as asleep, or he's in a non-passive gesture or attitude. And it is said that this is also to teach the people that he, Joseph, was not the Father of God. When you come out of the grotto, you can walk through the sanctuary area, passing through the refectory where the friars first had their food. And then if you enter this corridor, if you could enter this corridor, we can't go in there now. At the end of that corridor is the grotto where Francis himself, I'll show you that in just a second, went and stayed and prayed when he was in Greccio. If you look to the end of the corridor, you can see the crucifix. This was the grotto of Francis. To the left is a fresco of the 16th century. It's a friar. He has his finger up over his mouth, the gesture of silencio. And then to the right, this is 16th, 17th fresco. We don't know who the artist was. These are all symbols associated with Christ's crucifixion, and a little cherub here near the symbols of the crucifixion. Another part of the sanctuary which you can visit is the dormitory of St. Bonaventure. There are 15 cells here, simple wooden cells. They're no longer used. They were used from the time of St. Bonaventure, who was head of the Franciscans then there between 1260 and 1270. And I believe those cells were used up till the early 20th century. You may also see the pulpit used by the great Franciscan St. Bernard of Siena when he preached there in 1444. And after you come out of this area, you have this wonderful view of the countryside. You look at it and you can imagine Francis seeing this scene as he came out of his grotto. Oh, and I have to mention this, when we went up there and seeing it from afar and seeing the mountains, Pino said to me, "Ma perché Francesco amava questi posti così freddo?" Why did St. Francis love these places which are so cold? The words of a Sicilian, right? But as I came out, Pino by that time was in the car warming up. I passed a little room and there was a door open, a Franciscan sitting there, a sign which said Confessione. And I went in and I said to the Franciscan, "Pace bene," the Franciscan greeting, peace and good. And I said, "Father, may I simply ask you some questions?" And he smiled. I could tell behind his mask, the twinkle in his eyes. He said, "Certainly, let us go outside." And we walked outside and I asked him, how long he'd been there. And I found out he was the Father General there. A Father General is called by the Franciscans, and this is the will of Francis, Padre Custode, sometimes Padre Guardiano. Custodian father, the one who takes care of his brothers, not Padre Generale, not the boss, but the one who cares for his brothers. So this is the Padre Custodi. I asked him, "How many friars are you, Padre?" And he said, "There are 4 of us." And then I thought, that's Francis's role of the hermitage. He said when they went away for periods of retreat, they should have gone 4 at a time. When they went up to the hermitage above Assisi, they were up there 4 at a time. And he said, "Due sono le madri, 2 sono I figli." 2 are the mothers, 2 are the sons. So this was the rule of hermitage. They went up for 40 days. For 10 days, 2 were the mothers. That is, they walked to town, begged for food. If the tunics needed to be washed, they washed them. If firewood needed to be chopped, they chopped it. The other 2 were the bambini, and they were there simply for prayer and meditation. And then after 10 days, the roles switched. The mothers became the children became the mothers. This was the rule of the Hermitage. When you come out of the Grotto area of Francis, you pass the church. This is a church built in the 20th century. It's dedicated to the Immaculate Conception. There's an image of Mary over the altar. And inside, along the wall, there are some lovely creche scenes. This one on the left is all in terracotta, and 2 little boys were lighting candles in front of the creche scene. And here's Francis holding the feet of the little Christ child. And these are people from Greccio and maybe friars with him praying. And over here to the right are Joseph and Mary. This young man was lighting a candle before the crucifix. And as you come out the door, you see the mountains and the hills there in front of you. And coming out the door, this bronze door, again, it's 20th century, Francis and the wolf. At first I thought, is that the wolf of Gubbio? And I've told this story in my talk, I think, on Gubbio, that they say that in the early 13th century, a wolf was harassing Gubbio, killing all the sheep, and Francis went to make peace between the Eugubini and the wolf. Well, probably the wolf represented an aggressive city-state attacking Gubbio, but this wolf probably is another wolf. It was a wolf attacking the sheep of the people of Greccio. When Francis first went there in 1209, it was a devastating year for the people of Greccio, the Grecciani. Their sheep had been attacked by the wolves, and the shepherds were not able to, raise enough sheep, sell enough lambs to earn a living. It was a very critical year for them, that year in the early 13th century. And there again is the view. Now, the town of Greccio, we're up at the sanctuary, is about 6 kilometers from here. And we decided that we were going to go to see the city of Greccio as well. Before we left, I asked this family group if I could take their picture. They were all masked, but they weren't wearing their masks together because they were a family group. I was masked. I stood very far away and just zoomed in on them, and they were delighted. I said, "Can I send you to America for Christmas?" They said, "Oh, we would love it." So I said to the children, "Do you know how to say Buon Natale in English?" And one of them said, "Merry Christmas." So they all said Merry Christmas, and I taught them Happy New Year, or they knew Happy New Year. So this is a family group. Behind them, right here, would be the grotto. To the left would be the church. This is the place where I met the Padre Custode, where he was sitting in here, available to anybody who wanted to go to confession. And this is the view of Monte Terminilo. This is over 200 meters above sea level, over 7,000 feet. And we're in Latium, and it's sunset. And this was the view as we were leaving the sanctuary. And this is the town of Greccio. In Greccio today, about 1,500 people lived. It was a walled castle village when Francis first was there, devastated in the 13th century by continual attacks, also from the Germanic feudal overlords, and then later rebuilt. In Greccio, there's one small piazza there. There's one church you can see up on the right. And the lovely thing about Greccio is so many of the homes have frescoes of episodes of the life of Francis on the walls. This is Francis with Clare of Assisi. Here's Francis with a line from the Canticle of the Creatures. Praise be the Lord for Sister Water, who is most useful and humble, precious and chaste. This is another image of Francis on the wall of another Greccio home. And there was even an image of the first Nativity right over the only coffee bar. It was open, the only coffee bar, I believe, in Greccio. And I want to show you a detail of that. I bet there are some people alive today in Greccio who are portrayed in here. This is a contemporary fresco on the stucco. And this is the first nativity scene of Greccio. There's the Virgin, there's St. Francis, and who are all these other people? They might be Grecciani of today portrayed on the wall. This is an image of the first creche scene of Greccio by a lovely artist, a wonderful artist, I think, Nino Venturini. He works in a factory in Assisi. He must be in his 30s or 40s. No, 30s probably. He's very young and he's a passion of art. And this is a painting he did on oil of the first crib scene of Greccio. And when I saw it, I asked him about it and I said, this one is so curious with Francis hugging this sheep. And he said, this is related to one of the stories of Francis called the Fioretti, the little flowers of Francis. And the story is that Francis, the night of in Greccio, when he was telling the people about the first Christmas, he was so emotionally excited and so wrought up that he couldn't even say the name Jesus. He just kept saying the babe in Bethlehem. And then as he preached, he kind of bleated and warbled a bit and tried to almost make sounds as if he were a sheep to remind people that the Lamb of God was born. And he also said, and remember that I am just God's jester anyway. So here we have the Zamponiari playing their bagpipes. This is a Zamponiaro. I remember when I was studying in Rome in 1968, up on the steps, the top of the steps of the Aracelli Church, right there near the Capitoline Hill, there were Zamponiari who looked just like that from Abruzzo. They were shepherds of Abruzzo, big furry boots. The Zamponiari, you know, the bag here of the bagpipes is made from the skin of a sheep. Now, this is another image which is beamed onto the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi. It's another nativity scene, and this is the Nativity by Giotto from in the lower Basilica of St. Francis, and this was painted between 1308 and 1311. And here is the fresco as it is in the lower Basilica. Sleeping Joseph, there he is. And the angels, this one flies down, swoops to the shepherds. Get over there, you're going to miss the event of the century. A narrative scene because we have not just the birth of Christ, the child given to his mother, but first being washed and cared for by the midwives who assisted. Before the frescoes appear on the basilica, it's really quite an extraordinary show. I was there. It takes about a half hour to see it all. Up will come an image, and this is from a fresco by the School of Giotto, of the countryside around Assisi as projected on the basilica. Here's one of the city gates, the Porta Nuova gate. This is the Benedictine Abbey church, which was up on the hill of Mount Subasio. And then the image turns to the structure of the basilica here. So we're seeing the building of the basilica, and then actually the frescoes inside. And I want to show you here a video which gives you an idea of this extraordinary portrayal of Christmas done this year in Assisi. And this is the birth of Francis in Assisi. This is the cardinal, who is a Franciscan. There we see the image of the building of the basilica. One of the nurses caring for the COVID patients are part of the creche scene. And this is the creche scene that is created in front of the basilica. Here again is the beaming. And look at this image of Francis placing the Christ child in the manger. And this is an image of the Cathedral of San Rufino. And look at from Enel the message, we are an open power for a brighter future. They've used about 100 projectors to do this beaming onto the Basilica of St. Francis. This is the creche scene, which is in front of the basilica with Francis and one of the nurses. This is a tribute to the nurses and doctors caring for the COVID patients this year. And they wanted one of the nurses right in front of the Basilica with Francis of Assisi. As mentioned at the beginning, all of this beaming was done by Enel, which is the National Institute of Electricity in Italy, and especially the Enel X group, who specialize in digitalization and also conservation of energy, illumination through conservation of energy. This image of Francis is probably a copy of the image of Francis, which is in the lower basilica, frescoed by Cimabue, teacher of Giotto, who frescoed here. He was from Florence, frescoed between 1278 and 1280. And look at these signs of the stigmata, the holes in the hand, the tunic is torn open. It said he had the sword wound of Christ in his side. This is a side view of the nativity scene, which is in front of the basilica. And there again, we have sleeping Joseph. Usually in front of the basilica every year, we have quite an amazing crib scene. It is done by the Angeletti family, who own the coffee bar right across the street from the basilica, the Bar San Francesco, and they create it with life-size figures. This is Pino and myself one year. You can see the nativity scene behind us. We've just come out of the basilica, or we're just going in, I believe, to the great Christmas concert. Now, the Christmas concert every year in Assisi, guess what? It's going on right now. Is the basilica packed? It is totally empty. Who's singing? Andrea Bocelli. And it will be televised December 25th on national television, and it is the annual Christmas concert. We were able to go one year. You have to go with special tickets. Pino had done some work on the Franciscan press office. We were very, very lucky to have tickets to this concert, to be invited to go, and it was an extraordinary experience. There was Pino taking pictures of the orchestra, and I was taking a picture of the basilica damage of the earthquake of September 26, 1997. Some of you saw my talk on that. It's now on the virtual experiences page. When this collapsed, crashed into 30,000 pieces, 50% was restored, the world's greatest fresco restoration project right over the door. And I was thrilled. I wrote about the Christmas concert on my blog. I was thrilled because I was allowed free reign to photograph anywhere I wanted in the basilica, because when you go through as a guide, you're told first you have to keep quiet, everybody in your group, and no photography, no photography, no photography. That night you could go around and photograph to your heart's content, and the guards simply smiled. And right here, just to the right of this fresco, would be the fresco of the crib scene of Greccio, by Giotto's followers, let us say, very late 13th century. This is coming out of the basilica after the concert. In past years, when the wonderful crib scene was on the lawn, set up by the Angeletti family, figures nearly life-size, quite an extraordinary endeavor. Crib scenes are throughout Assisi, usually before Christmas, not this year. For the Concorso Presepi, the crib scene contest. Presepe, by the way, comes from the Latin praesepe, meaning before the fenced-in area or before the stalled area. So the Italian word for crib scene means stall, really, or in front of the stall. And there used to be every year the extraordinary crib scene contest. You wander through Assisi, there would be up to 100 different crib scenes in shop windows, hotel windows, done by school children, kindergarten children, artists. This is done by an artist. These are two from a kindergarten. Look at the Mary and Joseph, the Christ child. This is another kindergarten group, their creche scene. The Comet Star. There's always a Comet Star where there's a crib scene, letting you know that wherever you see the Comet Star, there will be a crib scene nearby. This was done by another school group, all kinds of pasta sprayed gold. This is a choir of angels done in pasta. This is another crib scene of a school. And here are two crib scenes in the competition done by adults. I believe these figures were in olive wood in front of the Basilica of St. Clair. This is all olive wood. This is a contemporary crib scene. And here's the comet star up here. Do you see it? Indicating that this under it will be the Holy Family. Living creche scenes are an important part of the culture of Umbria, I would say Central Italy in general, because of the tradition of the living creche scene of Francis in Greccio in 1223. And we would go always to a living creche scene when our children were small, particularly sometimes to the one of Armenzano. Armenzano was a castle village, is a castle village. It's in the hills outside of Assisi. The population today is 20 people. In 1950, 500 people lived here. In the year 1400, the Middle Ages, there were, even before the Middle Age, before 1400, around 1300, about 400 people lived there. And they were probably mostly shepherds. And now, again, just 20 people. And every year, one of their highlights is recreating Bethlehem as it would have been the night Christ was born. This is one of the buildings in the center of Armenzano. And up here, every year at the creche saying there will be Herod shouting from the balcony, bring me that young child. How can there be another king? How he dare, etc. It's really something to see. So here we are about to go into the creche scene. We're waiting outside with other people. This is a prophet who is announcing that soon a child will be born in Bethlehem. And here are some of the figures going in to get in place. This woman will be part of a market scene. This is the rabbi who will be teaching the children in a school scene. Here is one of the guards of Herod's palace. These were probably two shepherd figures. This woman is going into a scene. She's going to end up weaving at the loom with her little child nearby. These two are going in to take the hay into the stall where the Christ child will be. Here go Mary and Joseph. And generally the baby is the youngest child born in the town. 1 year, a friend of ours was in the Armenzano creche scene with her little baby and her husband as Joseph. This is one of the scenes in the living creche scene, the baking of bread. And you can't imagine the passion with which the people participate in this. You can see the potter and his daughter. And let me tell you this is how the people participating in the living manger scenes would spend Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, December 26th, national holiday, the Feast of St. Stephen, January 1st, national holiday, January 6th, and the kings come on January 6th, the Magi, and bring the gifts to the Christ child. This is how they spend their Christmas on Christmas Eve. They're not having a huge dinner and opening presents. They're reliving the first Bethlehem. This is a scene. We were there January 1st last year. This is a scene of a mill. He's grinding flour here. This is one of the prophets speaking in the street. He was delighting Pino with his prophecies about the new king coming. There's Herod up in his palace, sending orders that he wants the new child eliminated. There are the Magi bringing their gifts to the Christ child. There's the crib scene, Mary, the Christ child, and Joseph. And Pino was especially fond of the little donkey eating the hay. We have 2 donkeys. This is another village where there's a living manger scene every Christmas near Assisi, a feudal castle, the Castello di San Gregorio. In the 12th century, there are documents about this castle saying it was given to the priors at the Cathedral of San Rufino. By the 13th century, it is vied over. Both Assisi and Perugia seek to possess the castle of San Gregorio. In the early 15th century, Perugia manages to hold on to it for about 30 years. Then it returns to Assisi, and now it is abandoned, and about 10 people live there. And I walked through it last week. This is inside the Castle San Gregorio. This is the little toy of one of the children. This is one of these homes on the right is restored. And walking through it, it was very sad to know that this Christmas, these scenes aren't going to be taking place because of COVID. No living manger scenes are permitted this year. And the towns are asking, I read the website of one of the towns, Petrignano di Assisi, where there's usually a living manger scene. And the announcement was on the internet, we will not have a living manger scene this year, but we ask everyone to create a creche scene, put it in their shop windows, put it in their gardens, put it at the front doors of their house, so that we remember the first Christmas. In this scene, we have the blacksmith, and these women are making brooms. This man is working leather. This man is grinding grain. This woman is working at the loom, a young girl actually, Mary and Joseph. Herod, guarded by his soldiers. These people are probably really missing the good times of last year. This is Herod with his court of lovely young women. And as I left, the comet star was illuminated on the front of the Castle of San Gregorio. And it was sad to see because the comet star means that here there will be a crib scene. So the comet star is there, but the crib scene won't be there, at least not the living creche scene. Gubbio, quite an amazing place to visit at Christmas. It is known for its Christmas tree, which is made the Guinness Book of Records in 1991. This is the largest Christmas tree in the world. And the Eugubini have been lighting their mountain. This is Monte Terminilo with this Christmas tree. It's lit every year on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And the Christmas tree of Gubbio has been lit since 1981. As of 2010, it's powered by solar energy. 100 people work on it for 3 months before to get it all set up. The cables are about 900 meters, but they're left there all year. There are about 800 lights, and the comet star cable is about 1 kilometer long. And for the Eugubini, this Christmas tree is a tribute to their beloved patron saint, Saint Ubaldo, who's buried right here at the top of the mountain in the Basilica of Sant Ubaldo, that 12th century bishop who is adored by the Eugubini, and the reason for which they run their candlesticks, the Ceri, up that mountain on May 15th, the Corsa dei Ceri. So Gubbio, there's lovely city hall, 13th, 14th century. And the Roman theater below Gubbio from the 1st century BC. Illumination in Assisi this year by Enel is also illuminating for us our city bell tower of the 14th century, the Minerva Temple. Here's the comet star. Minerva Temple, dedicated to the goddess Minerva. The Greeks called her Athena, from the 1st century BC. The bell tower is 14th century. And the Cathedral of San Rufino. This illumination was lit on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and this represents the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel asking Mary to be the mother of God. The Cathedral of San Rufino is of the 12th century AD, built, obviously AD, pardon me if it's 12th century, built on the site of the martyrdom of Rufinus, first Christian bishop of Assisi in the 3rd century AD. Those of you who have heard other lectures will remember that he is the patron saint of Assisi. Francis is the patron saint of all of Italy, along with Catherine of Siena. So usually on December 8th, there's a different kind of illumination. This year, it was the illumination of the Cathedral of San Rufino. and people are they're coming actually from all over Italy now to see the Christmas illumination of Assisi. It has been presented on national television news. And these people are not from Assisi. I don't know where they were from. They were here taking photos of this beaming of the Annunciation. And here's the angel Gabriel. This figure was made particularly for this Christmas. I believe it was made in stucco. This is the angel Gabriel. This is the Virgin. And here they are illuminated on the cathedral. The illumination we usually see on December 8th is actually, I should say, on December 7th, the night before the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the focaraccio. That is the big, ugly bonfire, which burns in front of the 14th century fortress called La Rocca Maggiore. And legend says it will light the way for the Virgin's home being flown in from Nazareth. And that home is now in the Basilica of Loreto in the Marches. And I'll show you a photo in a minute. And the bonfire is to light her way. Now, this was the poster last year of the bonfire. This was the poster this year, because Amici della Montana, the community associated with the conservation of our mountain areas, this year just illuminated the fortress, but there couldn't be a bonfire where everybody gathers and shares roasted chestnuts. You see the cones of roasted chestnuts they're holding, and they share wine. There's volunteers there giving out cones of roasted chestnuts, hot mulled wine they have. There's the fortress behind us, not permissible this year. Here's 3 people sharing hot roasted chestnuts and wine. I remember one year going up with our children, and Mattia was a little guy then, and we didn't know it, but he was served a little bit of hot mulled wine. And then it became very clear, I think, to his father Pino that it had been a little bit too much of the hot mulled wine. And this is the view from the fortress as you're eating your roasted chestnuts and looking down and sipping your wine. The Cathedral of San Rufino, 12th century, the Basilica of St. Clare, 13th century. So the bonfire will light the way for the home of the Blessed Virgin, flown in from Nazareth and now conserved in the Basilica della Santa Casa, the Basilica of the Holy House in Loreto in the Marches region. And it is said that the house was flown in 1294, 1295, end of the 13th century. They wanted to protect the sacred house. This was the time of, I believe, the 5th Crusade. It was the time of the Crusades. They wanted to protect these houses sacred to Christianity, these edifices sacred to Christianity, from the Muslims there and their attacks at the time. So they flew the Blessed Virgin's house out. And they got it as far as Recanati. And they had, I think the angels flying it or wherever, they had to detour because there were problems going on below and conflict and so forth. And they eventually end up with the Virgin's house in Loreto. The basilica is built over it. And in 1509, Donato Bramante, great Renaissance architect, will build the enclosure around it in marble. So this is inside the Basilica of Loreto, the Santa Casa of Donato Bramante, 16th century. And of course, talking about Italy, we must shift for a minute our attention to the extraordinary city, one of my favorite in all of Italy, Napoli. And the street in Napoli dedicated to the creche scene makers called Via San Gregorio Armeno. And this is a usual year, not this year. It is a silent street this year. These are all the stands with creche scene figures made by the great artists called pastorari, or shepherd makers, of San Gregorio Armeno. Here's a typical Neapolitan creche scene. Here are two workers. The pastorari means shepherd makers. This pastorato is sculpting in clay the head of Joseph. He's assisted by someone else who's doing another head, perhaps that of an angel. Pastorato working. This young pastorato is making one of the edifices which are in the crib scene. And this is another image of inside a store. These are some of the figures sold. People collect these scenes. They have extraordinary creche scenes. The fruit vendor, kings, peasants, shepherd women, vegetable vendors. Excuse me, Julia. Oh, my daughter was asking me something, and I'm sorry. Pardon me for taking my attention. So the creche scene in Naples comes to maximum splendor in about the 18th century, 17th century first, because a big fan of the creche scenes of Naples was the Bourbon King Charles, as well as his son Ferdinando. And Ferdinando also oversaw the work and hired people to assist in decorating his creche scene. People who sculpted, who worked in copper, who worked in gold, who did embroidery. And that is when the Neapolitan creche scene will reach maximum splendor during the Bourbon rule of Naples, 17th, 18th century. This is a scene of the creche scene, and this is the panaro, the lowering down of the basket so that the shopkeeper can put your bread in. They still do that in the back streets of Naples. Another scene of a Neapolitan creche scene. You could see the butcher, the woman out on her balcony. She's drying her clothes. Some of these figures are about 1/2 inch in length. Some of the pastorati will specialize in the human figures. Others will specialize in just fruits or sausages or meat or animals. This is an inn scene that's typical of the Neapolitan creche scenes, is the sharing of good food, because this is a time of great hunger among the street people. They don't have everything that the wealthy do and the nobility and the noble people do, and they're realizing or bringing to life their dreams for abundance and so forth in the creche scenes. So the creche scene of Naples always shows abundance. Abundance, the fruit vendors, look at this. Their carts are overloaded. This is the person selling eggs and cheeses. Look at that basket of eggs. Again, the fruit vendor, a basket overloaded. Look at these cheeks and the jowls in terracotta, absolutely extraordinary work. And one year, the first time I think I saw the creche scenes was either 2010 or 2011. And I wrote a blog article on this, and it's still on my website. Just put in the word Naples. And I did some photos comparing a creche scene in Naples today. Here's a butcher. Here's the Neapolitan creche scene. Here's Carmine, the chestnut vendor, roasted chestnuts. Here's a Neapolitan creche scene of the Ferrigno family, one of the most famous of the Neapolitan creche artisans. And this is a woman selling roasted chestnuts. From the Neapolitan creche scene, a fisherman. And look at the net. A very beloved figure of the Neapolitan creche scene is the shosho. The shosho is usually a hunchback. He's called the gobbo, the hunchback. And he will keep away the evil eye, which is called the malocchio. All these symbols keep away the evil eye, the horseshoe, the garlic. You wear garlic around your neck if you want to keep away the evil eye. And the importance, look at 13 is, the unlucky number. And having the shosho in your creche scene will bring you good luck. So he's an important figure. This is Marco Ferrigno, and his family has been in the business of making the Neapolitan creche scenes. He's been a pastoraro since he was a young boy. His family has created Neapolitan creche scenes since the late 19th century, I believe mid-19th century. He used to work with his father, Giuseppe. I believe his father died just over 10 years ago. I talked to him on the phone the other day. And I said, how did you start, Marco? And he said, when I was a little boy and I came home from school, school's out around lunchtime, and Mama used to take me to the bottega, to the workshop where she worked with Papa. And I sat under the table and I worked with them. So I've been a lover of the creche scene since I was a child. And I said, what does it mean to you to be a pastoraro? And he said, it is so extraordinary to be able to combine my passione with my work. And I said, what about this COVID year? What is it like for you? And he said, well, we can sell some of our work on internet. But he said, it's not the same. I miss the human contact, the people coming into the shops, the people seeing us work. They must know that what we're producing are not industrialized figures. They have to see how we're producing our figures. It's just not the same to have contact with people only through the internet. It's very, very difficult, he said, for all the pastorari of Naples. Here are two of his show figures. They're absolutely extraordinary, aren't they? Another important figure of the Neapolitan creche scene is Benino, the sleeping shepherd. He's always in the Neapolitan creche scene. He's a central figure. And it said that Benino dreamed of the creche scene. And he dreamed of the first nativity. And to wake Benino is to bring bad luck to the creche scene. So it's always the sleeping Benino. And his name has been corrupted over time. Sometimes now they say, as of the fascist period, Benino is called the Benito. This is a fruit vendor. This is a man selling pots and pans made of copper. And this year, Ferrigno Marco has added to the creche scene, and not only Marco Ferrigno, but many of the pastorari of Naples have added to the creche scenes the nurses' mast and the doctor's mast as a tribute to those who are serving the people of Italy during the travesty of COVID. This is Via San Gregorio Armeno, usually in December 2020. And this was not this year, but a past year. Marco, like many a Napolitano, during the day, periodically has his cafe. And he's called the little cafe, and they've brought him his cafe. And always in Naples, you're served a glass of water with your cafe. And there's a whole cult to coffee, of course, in Italy. You can have a cafe corto or cafe lungo. The Napolitano will always want it corto, the glass only half filled. Some will want it a vetro. And if you ask why you want it a vetro, there's different reasons. One woman has told me she wanted it a vetro so she could see the coffee. Another said because the dishwasher gets the glass cleaner. Another said because you can see the foam better, etc. So you order a vetro, you order corto. When I go, a vetro means in a glass, a vetro. When I go into a coffee bar, I'm often asked, dico, buongiorno, un caffè per favore. And they say to me, signora lungo? And I look at them and say, look, io sono americana, ma non per il caffè. I'm American, but not for the coffee. They're asking me if I want it long. That means with more water. And I say, I'm American, I'm American in how I speak, but not in how I like my espresso. And cafe is the way to socialize. You meet someone you haven't seen in a long time. Ci vediamo per un caffè? Shall we see each other over a coffee? Now, there was a wonderful custom which started in Naples after World War II, when there was a lot of economic difficulty for many people, a wonderful tradition called the caffè sospeso. The caffè sospeso a Napoli is suspended coffee. And I think one of the first cafes to start it, or today where it's very, very common, is the Caffè Gambrinos. And this sign here tells us you can place here your fiscal receipt or your receipt for a coffee for someone who has need. So you go in, you order coffee, and you say, I'd like to also order a cafe sospeso. So you're paying for two coffees. One you drink, and the other one is for someone who comes in and can't afford the coffee. In the Milan area, I think it's 25 bakeries this year have joined together to adopt a new initiative, which is quite wonderful. And it's called the Panettone Sospeso, the suspended panettone, or the panettone set aside, if you will. And you go into one of these bakeries or coffee shops, and you buy your own panettone for your family. If you buy another panettone, it is going to be given to one of two associations suggested by the city of Milan. One association is for homeless who have nowhere to stay, and will provide them with housing. Another association is taking care of Milanese who this year, due to the COVID disaster, have great economic difficulties. And all the panettone, which are being set aside, the panettone sospesi, will be delivered December 22nd to these two associations. So these are some of the wonderful photos of bakers who are participating in the suspended panettone initiative. So look at these panettone suspended above them. These people have agreed to offer panettone to those who need. So anybody who buys a panettone there, the baker itself puts in a panettone, which will then be given to one of these two groups of people in great need. Panettones are dessert. We're starting off our Christmas lunch with tortellini, which is a small little ring pasta, also called cappelletti, and I'll show you a picture of it in just a moment. This is tortellini being made at Ristorante Giovanino, not far from our house. And Rosella is making the tortellini with the rasagnolo, as they call it in Umbro. She'll rub the dough out with, her wrists, actually. This is her granddaughter, Martina, filling the tortellini. And the filling is a little bit of ground pork, ground beef, a little bit of diced mozzarella, Parmigiano, etc. And she will roll them up and then cut them and to form them into these little tortellini. That is what we're having on Christmas lunch, tortellini in brodo. Now I want to show you this wonderful image. Let's see. Hold on, we'll go back this way. Oops. I just want to, go back here. Okay. This is a wonderful painting by Nino Vetturini, the naive painter of Assisi. And this is called Christmas Lunch. And this is his image of his Christmas lunch. The only heat in the house was the fireplace. This is his nonna rolling out with the rasagnolo, the dough of the tortellini. Here's the flour and the eggs, which she'll use to make the pasta. Here's the grinder with the meat. And these little blobs of meat have come out of her grinder. And Nino says this is himself and his sister under the table where the broth is boiling away, the chicken broth with the carrot, the celery, the onion that will be served for Christmas lunch. They're under the table and they're going to taste it to make sure it's good before Nonna will serve it. Another food served at Christmas time is gobi. We call it in Umbria. These are cardoons. It's a thistle-like plant. Its taste is very much like artichoke. And this is one of Nino's paintings of a woman selling gobi or cardoons at the market just before Christmas, a farm woman. And she's wrapped her cardoons in the local newspaper, wet it down. And she's got it wrapped around the Cerco del Trovo, a newspaper of Umbria, and the customers will come by, buy their gobi. Then you take them home, you clean them, strip the outside down, boil them, and then what you're going to do is batter fry them. And after you batter fry them, You lay them in a pan, cover it with tomato sauce, Parmigiano. You also put a little bit of mozzarella out before it goes into the oven. And that is our side dish on Christmas Day. What is going to be your main dish? It could be roast turkey, it could be roast beef, it could be roast duck, all different areas of Italy. And let me say this, the Gubbio alla Parmigiana is a typical Christmas side dish in Umbria. And how not to mention, if we're talking about the season, La Befana. She is the good witch who fills the stockings of the children on the eve of January 5th. And our children were always the envy of the other children at their school because they got 2 stockings. Children of an American mother, Santa Claus filled the stockings on Christmas, not here in Italy usually. It's Befana filling the stockings on January 5th. She's the good witch. And our children's stockings were filled by Santa on Christmas Eve and the Befana on January 5th. Befana, it's a corruption of the word epifania, which means to show, manifestation of a divinity from the Greek, epifania. It becomes bifania, befania, poi befana. And she rides through the sky on her broomstick, bringing good gifts to the good little children. And if you're a naughty child, you might get in your stocking, but that never happens to anybody as far as I know it, coal. And in the bakeries and pastry shops just before the Befana, they'll sell candy coal. It's a kind of sugared food and it's called carbone. Our children loved it the year of January 6th when we woke up in the morning and their mother's stocking had been filled with coal and ashes from our fireplace. So the Befana riding on the broomstick, except the tradition can be modified a bit because, for example, near Spoleto, the Befana arrives on a donkey coming into the piazza on January 6th. In Perugia one year, she arrived in an old car. One time in the Umbrian town of Trevi, she arrived in a carriage. And do you know that people who work for the fire department have a lot of work on January 5th? Because many times it's people working in the fire department who are dressed up as Befana and slithering up and down bell towers and everything. One year, a Befana jumped out of the bell tower in the city of Assisi and slid down the surface on a rope. And when she arrived at the bottom, somebody brought her sack and all the children came and got their sweets from the Befana, who slid right down the building. This is a Befana in Santa Maria degli Angeli, and actually this Befana arrived by motorcycle. Those little boys are a bit puzzled by this, and they're waiting for their gifts from the Befana. So January 6th, the Feast of the Befana, and here she is hanging on our Christmas tree. This year, actually, we don't have our full Christmas tree. We just have a small one because this year, Christmas, it'll just be us with Julia and Guglielmo. It's a small Christmas this year. And let us hope that next year at Christmas time, you'll all have the pleasure of maybe being here in our area and participating in some of the wonderful traditions of the holiday season in Umbria and throughout Italy. And I'd like to wish everybody Buon Natale or simply Buone Feste. Stay well, stay safe. Thank you very much for being with us. And I hope you have wonderful holiday seasons, and I hope you've enjoyed this as my holiday gift to you. And I thank you very much for your contributions, and many thanks to those who've already contributed to our Christmas here. So grazie, buona festa.